Hello everybody, first things first, I just want to apologise that I didn't have any gender politics content last week. I'm sure several of you saw that I'm now doing some radio stuff, and last week I was rushing to get contacts for interviews for the radio show. Basically, that was where most of my focus was, and the funny thing is that I've ended up in the same situation this week, because last week I got one interview for this Thursday's episode, and some interviews lined up for weeks away, but no interviews lined up for this week, so I'm literally back to square one. And yet, despite that, I am so dutiful that I've decided to throw together a quick video for you guys anyway. Oh, and also in my show I'm doing with Luke Walsh, we actually spoke about Elliot Page and that whole thing, which I should have uploaded yesterday if everything goes to plan, and I would just like to remind you that if you subscribe to that and just get involved in that, it would be appreciated. My eventual plan is to basically be uploading 3 videos to this channel every week. 1 response video, 1 video on a topic, and a Sunday evening live show, which for the first couple of Sundays will just be continuing to make my way through Magdalene Burns' stuff, since we temporarily dropped below the goal on Patreon. But we've been above it for a while now, so I really do want to finish that. Also, the $70 a month goal is actually for me to double my output, but honestly, as soon as I'm ahead of the curve when it comes to this radio stuff, I'll commit myself to this fully anyway. So you literally have no incentive to give on Patreon, except of course supporting the hard work I put into these videos. Nonetheless, unfortunately, we still live in a society where getting a job on the radio is considered more legitimate than doing this stuff on the internet. Therefore, as somebody who also lives in the society, I need to make sure that I've got my fingers in a lot of pies. I do apologise if temporarily I have fewer fingers in this particular pie, but anyway, let's crack on.
You are a male who wants to occupy a female body like a parasite, but you can't, so you take pills that make you grow pectoral tissue, and you paint your face like a parody of exploited womanhood, and even if you do decide to mutilate your genitals, you'll still have big hands and wide shoulders, and you'll tower over females like a monster. Society needs to stop enabling these ridiculous delusions right now, and instead help you to get over the fact that no amount of makeup and surgery can make you a woman. That was some good free speech right there. I totally just came.
Suffice it to say, I also just came. This is definitely one of the more obvious examples of how Contra is being manipulative in presenting things this way. Basically, Cockbane makes the following claims. 1. Tumbles is a man, and there is nothing Tumbles can do to change that. 2. Tumbles wants to exist in a female body, which is wrong. 3. Tumbles takes pills that cause body modification, which is wrong. 4. Tumbles engages in hyperfemininity to signify womanhood, which is wrong. 5. Tumbles might decide to get invasive surgery on Tumbles' genitals, which is wrong. I just want to clarify, by the way, when I'm saying which is wrong, I mean which is morally wrong. I'm just realizing this might sound confusing, that I'm saying that these claims are wrong. No, the claims are correct, as I will get into. I'm saying the claim that Cockbane is making is that these are wrong things, that there is a moral judgment attached to these things. I did just realize that sounds confusing as I heard it in my head. 6. Even this won't achieve anything due to other secondary sexual characteristics. 7. The problem here stems from societal systems, not individual freedom. 8. Society should instead fundamentally change our paradigm of gender to rule out the suggestion that somebody can become a woman and work to treat gender dysphoria as a mental health issue that starts with the presumption that it is fundamentally fuck off and stop making so much noise. How did somebody close the door that loudly? That starts with the presumption that it is fundamentally deluded in a manner similar to anxiety, depression, or psychosis. Now yes, Cockbane is written as saying these things more aggressively and less tactfully, which is designed to make these claims seem more bigoted. However, all the claims are reasonable, which I'll get onto in a minute. Now also, Tumbles is shown being sad as very depressing music plays and the image turns black and white. Again, the suggestion is that we're supposed to understand what Cockbane has said as something cruel and unfeeling. Now, I don't deny that hearing all this would make Tumbles sad. Tumbles has been lied to and told that gender dysphoria makes somebody another gender. Moreover, Tumbles has probably been told that anybody who disagrees with this hates trans people. So Tumbles is probably interpreting this as sheer hatred from Cockbane. And perhaps this is confusing and upsetting to Tumbles. It's a bit like when a child cries upon being told that they can't do something by their parents. The child lacks the ability to understand that disapproval, even when expressed curtly, is not equivalent to hatred and is no good reason to get upset. I'm not quite in frame. I thought I might not be. Because really, what claim is there here that's worth getting upset about? Somebody disagrees with the way you define gender, somebody points out the undeniable fact that there are secondary sexual characteristics reliably associated with men, somebody believes the most reliable way to ensure you live a happy, fulfilled life is to move away from an affirmation model of therapy towards one that's going to challenge your presuppositions a bit more. If anybody gets upset by these benign points of view, then that simply tells you that they're a bit pathetic and that them being upset by things can't be considered a reliable indicator at all as to whether or not a comment was actually cruel or mean-spirited. Now, having said all of this, I'm not surprised that Tumbles is upset to hear this. After all, it's well established that people don't like believing they've fallen for a lie in the best of times. Just look at Trump supporters. It should be obvious as anything that he was never ever going to drain the swamp, but because they don't want to admit that they were duped by a brazen huckster, they invent elaborate conspiracy theories like QAnon. In an identical way, when somebody develops gender dysphoria, what they are displaying is that they have fallen for gender essentialist ideas that lead somebody to the concept that there is an experiential difference between men and women that transcends physical reality. You can't really believe that you are a woman trapped in a man's body or vice versa without presupposing that a man's essence and a woman's essence are transcendent experiences that make a meaningful difference to the character and identity of a person regardless of actual biology. And to be aggressively told that no, this idea of gender is complete nonsense, it's just based on stupid antiquated ideas of being a man or a woman that has no basis in reality, that being a man or a woman is just a social construct that extends from and exists to describe base material reality, to be told that when you're somebody who believes that your womanness is rooted in some deep spiritual truth that only you know about yourself, that is impeded by your physicality, which serves only to trap your true womanly self, well, a self-declared trans woman is going to respond to that the exact same way that a MAGA person is going to respond. How dare you tell me that I'm invested in a lie? And that's why, obviously, they invented queer theory, this idea that gender is nothing other than self-identity. Basically, gender has no meaning at all, and whether you're a man or a woman is determined 100% by your identity, not even dysphoria at this point, or surgery, or anything like that, just choice. Like any cobbled together conspiracy theory, it's very obviously intuitively not making any sense, but like the best conspiracy theory, it is totally unfalsifiable. You can point out until you're blue in the face that it simply doesn't make sense to say that if I just identified as a woman, I could suddenly claim to be a victim of patriarchy, or say that my oppression is woman's oppression, as described by all feminist literature that details the oppression of women. I could point it out, and anybody who's letting themselves be guided by basic intuition will disagree with me. But these people who have invented this theory, based on nothing other than a reactionary desire to avoid the implications of accepting that all this gender essentialism is nonsense, and this idea of being trapped in a woman's body makes no sense, will simply say, yes it does, it makes perfect sense. And you can't prove them wrong, because it's a conspiracy theory, really. And really, queer theory is to transgender activism what QAnon is to Trump supporters. It's a way of making yourself impervious to ever realizing that you're the schmuck in all this. And of course, we see this here in action, with the way that Tumbles responds to having very reasonable and intuitive series of criticisms listed off. Tumbles gets sad, but there isn't any response, just emotion, just sadness and anger at the suggestion that maybe Tumbles isn't in fact a woman. Okay, since I'm not in the habit of trying to make this response series short, I'm going to actually go through all 8 claims that Cockbane makes here.
You are a male.
Now actually it occurs to me that this isn't even saying that Tumbles is a man, simply that Tumbles is male. Male, of course, being a strictly biological category. So this is actually even more benign than I originally gave it credit for, but this simply shows that self-identity essentialism is getting crazier and crazier, because now even saying somebody is biologically male is considered controversial. Of course, even if Cockbane had claimed that Tumbles was a man, that still wouldn't be a mean or hurtful thing to say, because we know why gender-critical feminists define gender the way they do, and that it isn't for remotely malicious reasons. The appropriate response would be to make an argument for why the gender-critical position is wrong, which tumbles can't do.
Who wants to occupy a female body like a parasite, but you can't.
Obviously here there is a simile that serves to make the claim sound worse, although to an extent, yeah, if you're fetishizing this idea of existing in a female body and literally saying that living in a female body is the only way you can survive, which is a claim that lots of people with dysphoria will make, then that is quite parasitic. It is sort of commodifying female bodies to say that a female body is something you need to possess in order to feel happy and fulfilled. But once you strip away the controversial wording, this is just stating simple fact, that so-called trans women want to be in female bodies, which is ultimately impossible for them.
So you take pills that make you grow pectoral tissue.
So yes, trans women will take pills that cause body modifications. This is a perfectly valid thing to criticize, as there's something a bit off about anybody doing extreme body modifications because they have this obsession that this will make them happy and that they claim that they'll kill themselves if they're not allowed to. What part of this is supposed to be seen as okay in a civilized society? Like, whether you think plastic surgery is intrinsically immoral is a valid debate. Should women be getting breast implants simply because that's what's pleasing to some men? Does it make a difference if they insist it's their choice? What if they say that it's just because it's what they really want and it isn't intended to please men, that's just coincidental? Do we really believe that? This is where there is some debate. But I think we can all agree that if there's a woman who's saying she needs a breast implant because a breast implant is the only way she can communicate who she is as a person, and if she isn't able to get one, she might kill herself, then I think we can all agree that there's something wrong there. And if there's a whole class of women for whom this is the case, then something is wrong with society. So people getting body modifications is not necessarily the issue in itself, but it's precisely the importance that transgender people place upon these body modifications that makes it a concern.
And you paint your face like a parody of exploited womanhood.
The reason why this is a valid criticism are pretty wide and could span a whole video, perhaps a topical video at some point, who knows. But yeah, basically the idea of people you believe to be men acting hyper-feminine to signify that they are in fact women, all the while women are overwhelmingly the victims of male violence and oppression. I mean, if anything, it's quite shocking that making this criticism is considered controversial in today's progressive circles. Like, Cockbane is 100% right here. She is the victim, and she is explaining why the actions of Tumbles, a gender non-conforming man, are offensive to her as a woman.
And even if you do decide to mutilate your genitals,
the genital mutilation point is very much a continuation of the hormones and pills point. Like, is somebody wanting to chop their penis to bits and turn it inside out something that should be subject to moral criticism in itself? Maybe. You could make an argument about that. We're not a bunch of loser liberals here who believe that anything goes as long as it's a free choice. Choices don't exist in a vacuum, and we can criticize the societal factors that influence these choices and thus the choices themselves. But if we did live in a vacuum, could we say that consensual surgical genital mutilation is fine? I don't know. It's a scenario that's not too high on my list of priorities to entertain. However, given that we don't live in a vacuum, and we instead live in a profoundly gendered world, where ideas about gender dysphoria and contemporary theories of gender are incredibly new, it makes sense to suppose that perhaps an entire class of people thinking they need to get invasive genital surgery because they're accidentally the wrong sex is something we should at least be able to criticize without making an imaginary transgender person in a Dave Rubin parody YouTube video cry. That's not too much to ask for.
You'll still have big hands and wide shoulders, and you'll tower over females like a monster.
So again, ignoring the objectionable simile of like a monster, actually let's not ignore it for 1 second, because I just want to draw attention to the fact that when ContraPoints was writing Cockbane, the only method to make Cockbane's points not seem reasonable was apparently just to throw in an insulting simile every now and then. Anybody can write somebody to sound like the bad guy if that's an option. But aside from that, yes, men are generally taller than women. This should be the least controversial statement ever.
Society needs to stop enabling these ridiculous delusions right now.
Now, whether or not it is actively harmful for society to enable self-identity essentialism is actually another interesting question, which again could be discussed for a pretty long time. I do want to point one thing out. Society isn't just enabling self-identity essentialism, it's effectively mandating it. Sometimes it's legally, but if nothing else, it's very socially unacceptable to say that a self-declared transgender woman is not in fact a woman. It's just about socially acceptable to say that you have some concerns about the actions of individual trans women or how trans activism is being conducted. Even that will get you called all sorts of horrible things by most gender identity extremists. However, I would actually challenge any self-identity essentialist person watching this to find a clip of somebody saying trans women are not women in the most mainstream source you can. Obviously, you can find it on YouTube and Twitter, maybe you can find it in the paper, but I'm betting it would take quite a while to find a single clip of somebody saying unambiguously that trans women aren't women on British TV. And either this is because people who do believe this simply aren't platformed in the mainstream media, or because people who do believe this are too afraid to say these things in the mainstream media. Either way, the end result is that saying society enables self-identity essentialism is a bit of an understatement. It's like saying the Chinese government enables Xi Jinping thought. There's also the fact that most definitions of conversion therapy that are used when talking about outlawing conversion therapy also include any form of therapy for transgender people that doesn't affirm their self-declared gender identity. So yes, it could literally be illegal to provide counselling to transgender people that doesn't affirm their self-identity. Again, enabling is an understatement. Apart from this though, the reason why society needs to stop enabling self-identity essentialism is simply because it's intellectually dishonest, as evidenced by the fact that the people who affirm it only believe in shutting down debates. My radio show debut went up just this last week, and I interviewed Megan Murphy. After my dad listened to it, he said it was good, but that it would be nice to be able to hear the other side in the same show, since I interviewed two people. And I had to explain to him that for half a year now, I've been trying to get in contact with any group or individual that affirms self-identity essentialism, and none of them are interested in discussing their ideas in a free and open platform. So yeah, that's probably something society shouldn't enable. And yes, obviously this is just scraping the surface of how enabling these ideas about being transgender could potentially or provably be harmful to society, vulnerable groups, and transgender people themselves. Point being, none of this suggests the mildest of dislike for transgender people in any way at all.
And instead help you to get over the fact that no amount of makeup and surgery can make you a woman.
And of course we ultimately end with this fact, that to be a woman is an elusive goal based on faulty logic. Thus, pursuing it is ultimately doomed to fail. You can't become a woman because womanhood isn't something that can be attained. You can't be made a woman because womanhood isn't something that can be made. I'm reminded of the phrase, make a man out of you. The thing about that phrase is that it is essentialist. It comes with a series of presumptions about what it means to be a man. Catching bamboo sticks, smashing pots, shooting apples, carrying buckets of water on your head, karate chopping fish, and of course, the suitably phallic challenge of retrieving an arrow from the top of a large pole while also having to carry some heavy weights. The point being there's a suggestion that to be made a man of is to work hard to achieve certain virtues, and in doing so become authentically a man. Now I realise that no transgender person or self-identity essentialist is going to say that this is what they mean when they talk about being made a woman or being made a man. I get it. I mean, well, actually, some of them would. But they wouldn't say it outright. You just have to catch them in their circular logic until they concede that yes, they do believe in an essentialist idea of gender. The point I'm simply making is that the fact that people like ContraPoints seem to create this question of what can make you a man or a woman shows that deep down, this is what they're thinking of. That there must be something they can do to make themselves a woman so they can stop feeling depressed and anxious and obsessed with this idea that they're the wrong gender. What Cockbain is saying here, then, is stop. Stop being depressed, stop being anxious, and stop being obsessed. Stop taking hormones, stop wearing makeup, stop getting surgery. You can maybe do those things if they're because it's what you really want to do. But stop believing there is this thing you must do to make yourself a woman. You will never be a woman, so just be happy as you are. And pardon me, but I don't think telling people to be happy is a particularly hateful thing, or any reason to be sad. And notice that she explicitly says that society should help tumbles to get over something. So society should be compassionate and actively working to help transgender people. That doesn't seem hateful. And what should it be helping them to do? To change something about themselves? To experience conversion therapy? To live their lives in secret because their lifestyle is an anathema to the prudent values of proper society? No. To accept themselves as they are. How are we even pretending that this is hateful? This wouldn't be considered hateful for any other group. It wouldn't be considered hateful to say that gay people should accept themselves as they are, or that disabled people should accept themselves as they are, or indeed that gender non-conforming people should accept themselves as they are. But if somebody says, you know, I think that actually I'm not a man at all, and I'm in fact a woman, and I'm going to go out of my way to change myself into this idea I have in my head of what a woman is, and if I can't do that, or I'm not accepted by society as a woman because of it, then I will kill myself. Then yes, compassionate people who care about that person should say, why don't you just accept yourself and love yourself as you are? So that's a review of the 8 statements that Cockbain makes. And I hope you're now seeing that it's completely ridiculous to present Tumbles as a victim here who's just been on the receiving end of something that should make us feel sympathetic. No, a series of completely reasonable statements were made, and Tumbles has responded to that because of this cult-like mentality that pervades self-identity essentialism by acting as if some horrible affront has happened. I also want to point out how the reaction of Jackie Jackson here is quite telling. Jackie Jackson claps and says that what's just occurred is some good free speech. The implication, given that this is a parody, is that we're supposed to understand that it's wrong of Jackson to interpret what was just said as a defensible expression of free speech, since we should instead understand that this was actually a very hateful thing that shouldn't be considered good free speech at all. In other words, we're being primed here to draw a negative association between what was said here and the idea of free speech, that Jackie Jackson, who represents a humorous parody of Dave Rubin's free speech über alles mentality, is endorsing these comments as free speech, is supposed to communicate that Jackson is wrong, and these comments shouldn't be understood as a defensible expression of valid ideas within a free and open debate. So that's fun.
Well, hold on. Aren't you the one defining womanhood with stereotypes? If wearing high heels doesn't make you a woman, why does having small hands?
Cockbain never said that having small hands makes you a woman. Thus, Cockbain is not defining womanhood with stereotypes. Cockbain said that having big hands was contrary to Tumbles' desire to have a female body. Now, yes, this doesn't mean that no women have large hands, or that all men have large hands. I actually have pretty small hands. In fact, if I hold my hand up to my face, you can very clearly see that I don't have cancer. But this is just another example of how Contra, or Tumbles I guess, but I think this is Contra's error, doesn't understand how gender and sex work. And what I mean by that is secondary sexual characteristics aren't an all or nothing thing. And that's sort of why they're secondary sexual characteristics. So let's just take a second to make this clear. Gender critical theory is a theory, and like any good theory, it should adapt its understanding in order to respond to criticisms and objections. I understand how this terrain might already seem somewhat difficult for self-identity essentialists who are probably confused about why somebody wouldn't just respond to criticism by calling them a bigot and trying to get them silenced, but please bear with me for 1 second. A gender-critical person would probably say that the most meaningful indicators of somebody's sex are their chromosomes and their genitals. However, a gender-critical person also probably assumes that they know if somebody is a man or a woman when the person is fully clothed. Like, as far as I know, my crotch has never been visible on this channel, clothed or not. Maybe sometimes it's been unclothed, but never in shot. And yet, despite this, I don't think anybody has ever doubted that I'm a man. And therefore, we have to ask the question, how is it that you know, based on somebody's face alone, that they are a man or a woman? And the answer is secondary sexual characteristics. You probably know I'm a man because I have a bit of stubble going on right now, I have quite a broad jaw, and of course I do have a prominent Adam's apple, although I'm not sure if my camera has ever been good enough to pick that up. So based on these 3 attributes, you can tell I'm a man. But then Tumbles would come in and rather stupidly ask, so are you saying that having stubble, or a large jaw, or a prominent Adam's apple makes you a man? I'm confused. I can't understand your nuanced, sophisticated definition of gender. And that's when you of course explain that no, your secondary sexual characteristics are indications of your sex, but not in some simplistic and essentialist sense. It's not that these attributes in themselves make you a man or a woman, but rather that when taken holistically, there are aspects of your body, independent of your genitals or chromosomes, that indicate what your sex might be. And yes, perceptible sex is a spectrum. I could have more or fewer features typical of a man. Very few people are maximally sexed one way or the other, which is to say, displaying a totality of all the physical attributes most reliably seen in the male phenotype. We can actually have a hypothetical, maximally male phenotype without ever having somebody who is themselves maximally male, simply by looking at general trends. This is the nuanced, sophisticated way of dealing with gender and sex that I understand goes over most gender identity extremist heads. I really understand that this type of stuff might be hard for them to understand when they're presently blinded by rage at the fact that anybody would dare to disagree with our ideas. Now, I should make a distinction here and say that whether sex itself can be a spectrum is something I'm not really confident in getting into. Honestly, I'm not even 100% certain I just used the term phenotype correctly just then. I'm more interested in the philosophical, theoretical dimension to this, but the point that Cockbain is making here is that if you want to be a woman with a woman's body, then you can't just ignore these secondary sexual characteristics, because we as a society don't ignore these secondary sexual characteristics. I mean, a really obvious example would be attraction. As somebody attracted to the female sex, I don't need to see a woman's genitals before finding her attractive. The aspects of the female sex I'm attracted to are a bit more sophisticated than that. So to hear a so-called transgender woman simply dismiss these secondary sexual characteristics makes me realize that the theories underpinning this attitude are not theories that are interested in explaining the intuitions of people who actually live in this society. To have such a fundamental aspect of how we actually perceive somebody's sex completely dismissed by saying, well, small hands don't make you a woman, just shows the level of ignorance we're dealing with here, and the complete disregard for the obligation of actually crafting a theory of sex and gender that stands up to scrutiny. No, not every woman has small hands. Having small hands doesn't make you a woman. However, having small hands is one of several secondary sexual attributes that suggest an individual is female. And you can't just say that your ideology demands that everybody pretends this isn't the case. Oh, and I just want to quickly point out that wearing high heels and having small hands aren't really equivalent, because having small hands is a biological feature, and being a woman is intrinsically attached to biology, whereas wearing high heels comes from sexist societal ideas about gender roles.
Because small hands are a result of the same biological features that engender the female reproductive role, for which women, females, are oppressed under patriarchy.
Yes, exactly. It's about viewing biology in a wider sense than just having a vagina or whatever else. Lots of aspects of womanhood are about female biology, even those aspects of female biology where there can be some overlap with male biology. Alright, I'm going to wrap up now, so I just want to end on a final point. I really need to stress this. Self-identity essentialists are the ones who have a simplistic view of gender. I compared them to the QAnon of gender identity, and there's a very good reason for this. All conspiracy theories, really, are about reducing complicated reality into simple explanations. The reason why American democracy might be feeling broken is complicated, to do with all sorts of different factors. So it's just easy to pretend it's a conscious evil collective that is going to be defeated by one president just magicking them all away. And yes, complexities do arise from this, inevitably. Why has Trump now lost the election without having achieved anything? Well, there's some kind of 5D chess explanation. Sure, that explanation isn't remotely intuitive and seems to go fully against common sense, but it's the only way to make reality gel with the simple presupposition that Donald Trump is the savior of America in whom we can all put our trust. Similarly, sex and gender are complicated. We covered just one example of that in this video. We all assume we can identify somebody's sex based on attributes that we don't consider to be immediately deterministic of somebody's sex. That is confusing, and there's nothing wrong with that. All we need to do is come up with the simplest way of explaining sex and gender in a way that does actually explain it. So we say that there are secondary sexual characteristics which, when taken holistically, strongly suggest what sex somebody might be. Where there is ambiguity and confusion there, all we can do is embrace that. Just concede that sex is complicated, which I'm happy to do. However, self-identity essentialism is based on a simple presupposition, that what your gender is determined by your self-identity. They are truly, really married to this idea. Mostly, to give them credit, I suspect because it's the only morally defensible position they can take that allows for the claim that trans women are women. Otherwise they'd have to say that getting surgery makes you a woman, or conforming to certain societal stereotypes makes you a woman. I can understand not wanting to have those be their definitions. Saying gender is determined by self-identity isn't smart, or clever, or correct. But it is defensible. If somebody says they're attracted to women, and that for them, the reason they know somebody is a woman, and thus are attracted to them, is based on secondary sexual characteristics, then the self-identity essentialist position is just, nope, you may be attracted to a series of secondary sexual characteristics that you feel reliably suggest somebody is a woman, but actually, the only thing that makes somebody a woman is self-identity. So, if you say you're attracted to women, you should just really know that this means you're attracted to those who self-identify as a woman. There is nothing physical to it at all. You may be attracted to people with a series of secondary sexual characteristics, and it might be the case that these people happen to be those who almost uniformly have been regarded historically as women, both by feminist analysis and patriarchal oppression. However, nope, all those definitions are wrong, ours is right. The point being that, just like QAnon, the refusal to concede a point results in an explanation that isn't remotely intuitive and seems to go fully against common sense. And that's why this theory just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. It doesn't even begin to, and that's why I can spend so long just responding to a tiny fraction of this video. But that's all for today. I know I felt like I should have done more, but I'll say like and subscribe. What else? Share. Follow me on Twitter. Give on Patreon. People giving on Patreon is so cool because I like reading out names. It is my favorite part of these videos when I get to read out these names because there's just so many names and it's so good. Merry Christmas. Oh, subscribe. There's so many channels to subscribe to now. It's ridiculous. Subscribe to Dankpole. Subscribe to Cancel Council. Subscribe to the Eclectic Vanguard. Subscribe to Select and Reflect. These are all completely normal things for you to need to do. You know, it's not weird that I have this many channels when I've only just got slightly over 1,000 subs on 2 of those channels. It's very normal. I'm not weird for having this many channels, and you need to subscribe to all of them. No, seriously though, a lot of the channels are dealing... Oh, I probably shouldn't have fiddled with something while I was talking. A lot of the things on the channels are genuinely would be relevant to you guys and would be interesting to you, I think. Particularly Cancel Council, which again, there should have been an episode, a clip related to that. If you haven't seen that clip, go back and watch it because I think you'll enjoy it. And then you can subscribe and that will be good. The radio show, I think, is, you know, slightly interesting because of rules about neutrality in the UK. I'm not allowed to express any kind of opinion on the radio show, which is lame, but it does mean I can just interview people and kind of play devil's advocate, which I find quite fun. So yeah, overall, I'm going to make a squeak. There we go. I'll say thanks for watching. Yeah, like, subscribe, share, follow on Twitter, all that kind of stuff. Give on Patreon, and I'll just say thank you to my current patrons: Hannah Taylor, Kirsten, Stephen, Nancy D, Rubble of Empires, Lizzie Dasu, Constant Disappointment, Adriana Delgado, Harper Cole, Alex, Leica, Jane Einstein, George Sibley, Katie, Ryan, Vishnuvius Pranjanavan, I nailed it, That Feminist Your Father Warned You About, and Lily. Remember the Kaiser Chiefs? Bye.